Excited to share God's word. Today we're going to do the final installment of the Joseph series we've been in. And it's going to cover chapters 44 and 45 in broad strokes. But you can turn in your Bible and hopefully you're taking some notes as well. Thank you. Okay, I think I feel a bit loud. Because I'm still soft, I'm going to go louder. You can beg me back a little bit. Okay. So just to recap, I mean, most of us are familiar with the story of Joseph. And for maybe some of the folks that are here as guests for the first time, we've been traveling through this book of Genesis, reading about the amazing work God has been doing through this family and through the person of Joseph. But we also realize Joseph's a small piece in a big plan that God is working out. Last week, chapter 43 was called the Table of Mercy because it ended with Joseph and his brothers sitting around a table sharing a meal. They didn't know it was Joseph. He's this powerful man in Egypt, a second in command of the empire of that day. But he hid from them his true identity. And we know that as powerful as he is, he could wipe them out. He could imprison them. He could sell them as slaves. If he was bitter and angry and brutal, he could do a lot of bad things, but he didn't. In fact, he showed grace and mercy and providence and care all along the way. And last week when he invited them to sit at the table with him, it was mercy, grace, kindness that was on display. And remember how we said that points us forward to this table of mercy. And after the sermon today, we are going to partake of bread and wine. And we are reminded how even the Old Testament, there's these pictures that they're all along pointing forward to Jesus. And it's fulfilled in him where all of us who have transgressed against God, all of us have sinned, fallen short. Jesus also invites us not to be people that are under his wrath, but rather experience his grace and kindness and can come sit at a table of mercy along with him. Now, the big word in theology, if you want to make a note about it, is we speak about typology, when someone in the Old Testament is a type of Jesus. It's fulfilled in Jesus. There's another word we speak about, is foreshadowing. It's pointing forward to something that will be ultimately fulfilled in Jesus. And there's so much of that in this chapters of Genesis. So today we wrap it up. It's the climax of the story. And I'm going to pick it up from chapter 44. I'll talk you through it because there's a lot of verses to cover in our time. And we'll look at some key verses along the way. So first up, we get to chapter 44, verse 1, where it says, "Now Joseph gave these instructions to the steward of his house." This what that means, the bigger story. The brothers are going back to Egypt, and Joseph says to the steward, "Fill all the bags with as much provisions as you can." Abundance. He's caring for them. Refund their monies. The money bags, put that in the sacks as well. Some of the commentaries, they speculate that Joseph probably paid for all those things out of his own account, making it possible for them to be blessed and cared for. But he's got a bit of a ploy that he's working with, because he's got a plan. He's going to test his brothers, and he's going to make things work out a certain way. So he takes a silver cup, might have looked something like this, and he instructs the caretaker of his household. He says, "Put that silver cup in the bag of the youngest brother, Benjamin." They don't know it's there. It's hidden. And off they go. And they were barely out of the city. And Joseph tells the steward, "Go and find those men, and then look for my silver cup in their bags. Start at the oldest one's bags and work your way down to the youngest." And of course he would say this man and then that man and then end with that one. And off he goes, finds them traveling. He stops them and says, hey, what are you guys doing? Because one of you've stolen our master's cup. It's a big, important cup. It's a cup of divination. It's like implying it's not just some decoration you've stolen, it's a tool of his trade. And maybe they would think, is he like a wise man or a high priest in Egypt, and he's got this cup that he uses to look at the future? Now, keep in mind, the Bible doesn't want us to use things like divination, like tea leaves reading or stuff like that. It's occultic. The Bible says stay away from demonic stuff like that. Joseph is never, we are never told that Joseph did do that. But here's a little twist on it. Divination implies getting like divine, supernatural input to tell the future. That did happen when God spoke to him in dreams and gave him interpretations of Pharaoh's dream. So there was a divine revealing of the future that came from God. But it seems David there's a play happening, a pretending happening, because he wants them to think, like, we didn't just take a decorative cup, we took the cup that is used by this important man for important things like what the Egyptians do, divination. So the brothers say, well, hang on, we're honest men, we didn't steal anything. None of us would ever do something like that. And they are so sure of themselves, they say to the steward, listen, if one of us took that cup, let that man die, and the rest of us will be slaves. Now we know why the Bible says be quick to listen, slow to speak, because don't commit yourself to death and slavery too quickly. It could actually backfire on you. And so it happens. The steward works his way through the brothers' bags, and I could just sense the relief. Oh, it's not Reuben. Oh, it's not Simeon. Oh, it's not Judah, and on. And then they get to Benjamin, and they're sure there won't be anything there, but out of his bag comes this cup. And their lives are shattered. They think, Benjamin, what were you thinking? And Benjamin saying, I didn't do it. And they say, but you did. Look at the evidence. He says, I don't know how that happens. And there's all this turmoil happening right now. No one, they can't believe it, but the implication is he's guilty. Will this man now kill him? Will we now be slaves? They shattered. What will happen to our father when he gets news of this terrible thing happening to Benjamin? And he told us, don't let anything happen to Benjamin. So they tear their clothes. That's a thing still common in some places in the Middle East cultures today, where if someone passes away, if something terrible happened, people would rip their shirts, the cloth, in a way of saying, my heart, my soul is ripped apart by grief and pain right now. They go back to Joseph's household. They appear before Joseph. And he asked them the same thing. What were you thinking to do such a terrible thing? That cup can be used by me for divination. Don't you know that I can use it to tell the future? Like, you've stolen a very important tool of a very important person. And then the brothers, well, Joseph specifically, steps forward. Not Joseph. Judah speaks to Joseph. Judah, and that's in verse 16. We see that he says, what can we say, my Lord? Judah replied. Underline that name, Judah. It's important that we remember Judah is the seed carrier. From his heritage, his line, his descendants would one day come the Messiah. So he has a very important role that he's playing. He doesn't know it, but God does. And that's why God pulls him out and highlights his life for us, because he's the one who has the seed of the Messiah within his loins. So Judah speaks up and he says, what can we say, my Lord? What can we say? How can we prove our innocence? God has uncovered your servant's guilt. And that's something that Judah often says in this phase of his older life. Admitting guilt, admitting sin. He's not trying to cover up things anymore as he did back in chapter 37. Us brothers, we are now your slaves. We ourselves and the one who was found to have the cup. Well, Joseph says, no, I wouldn't do such a thing to you. Only the man who was found to have the cup will become my slave. The rest of you go back to your father in peace. But that was a horrendous situation. Not Benjamin. He can't remain here. He can't become a slave. We can't leave in peace if Benjamin stays behind. So Judah, again, he intercedes for them all. He intercedes for his brother Benjamin. He steps forward and very humbly he says, pardon your servant, my Lord. Let me speak a word to you. I want to plead our case to you. And I see a play on that word, pardon, because that's where I'm saying, excuse me, can I say something? Pardon me, can I say something? But prophetically, that's what they were after. That's what they needed desperately, is to be pardoned, to be excused, to be forgiven. And God is focusing on that bigger picture in what he is orchestrating all along. Now Judah explains the situation. So I think he's digging deep. He's giving his best speech, his best words. He's probably praying softly, God help me. And he explains to this ruler, we have an aged father. And there's a young son born to him in his old age. His brother is dead. And he, Benjamin, is the only one of his mother's sons left. And his father loves him. Keep in mind, Joseph, ruler, is the younger brother. That they are saying to him, our brother is dead. So he's sitting there saying, if you only knew, it's me. Maybe that was a tempting moment to say, ta-da, it's me. I'm not dead. Look at me, I'm here, I'm real. But he's controlling himself because I think the emotions would be building in him, bubbling up. He might be gripping the seats of his, the chair that is in and trying not to visibly shake because there's so much adrenaline, so much tension playing out. Yes, he can think why they say he's dead or lost forever because of what they did. They sold him. They wanted to kill him, but in the end they sold him into human trafficking. But now Joseph's saying the younger brother, one is dead, and he's got one biological brother from Rachel, his mom, which is Benjamin. And our father loves him. And when he says that, he's implying that he's the youngest, is dear to our father because the other brother is dead. And I was thinking how when I grew up, I was the oldest of 4 brothers. And when we were little kids, Mom would say to us sometimes, here's some coins. I need you, Joe, you go walk 2 blocks down to the cafe on the corner and buy some bread and milk for the home. And I would think, oh no, I don't want to go because my short legs, it takes a long time to walk that distance. And you'd walk, buy the stuff and walk back. It's just like my whole afternoon's gone. That's what it felt like. And when Mom would say, oh, Joe, I need you to go to the cafe, I said, can't apes go? The second oldest, and sometimes the apes can, and then apes go. And then apes go, no, can't Ernie go? The third one born. Let him go. And then Ernie would say, can't Peter go? Because he's the young, he never goes. And Mom says, Peter's not going. He's too small. He's too young. They were like super protective of him. And I was thinking, well, that's not fair. But now that I'm a dad myself, and when my kids were little, you do get a little bit protective of the youngest of the batch. And when another youngest comes in, then the other batch, well, you can go to the shops now. You're a bit more free in that sense. But this father was like that for the youngest, but not without reason. He'd already lost Joseph from his wife Rachel. And there's one son left, and that's Benjamin. So he's pleading. And he says there in verse 20, oh, sorry, did I skip? We've done verse 20. The next part, my father said to us, you know that my wife bore me 2 sons. One of them went away from me, and I said, he has surely been torn to pieces, and I have not seen him since. If you take this one from me too, and harm comes to him, you will bring my gray head down to the grave in misery. Again, Joseph's sitting there, and he's given a view of the conversations that happened in his father's tent after he'd been sold away. The fact that the brothers lied, that they told the dad Joseph is dead, that look at this cloak, he's probably been torn by an animal. And Joseph's thinking, so that's what they said. That's how they played, how they deceived father. That's what they told about me. And he could imagine how his father's heart was wrecked, how his soul was pierced, the pain that he was going through. And more so because Joseph is now a father himself. He has 2 sons. He would know how protective he is of his own sons, his boys. And he could just imagine what his own dad would have felt like thinking that his son had been torn to pieces by a wild animal. Judah says, so now, if this boy is not with us when we go back to your servant, my father, and if my father's life is closely bound up with the boy's life, sees that the boy isn't there, he will die. Your servants will bring his gray head of our father down to the grave in sorrow. His heart can't take another episode of what's happened before. Your servant guaranteed the boy's safety to my father. I said, that's Judah, if I do not bring him back to you, I will bear the blame before you all my life, my father. Now just pause there. Can you see how Judah has changed? Go back 22 years, chapter 37, where the brothers, with Judah being a leading figure, conspired to deceive, deceptively so, their father. After they plotted to murder their brother and then said, well, let's not kill him, let's sell him into slavery. That's the kind of people they were. And they lived with a secret, a dark secret for 22 years, and it burdened them. And every morning when they saw their dad and they saw the pain and the tears year after year after year, he's trying to heal but he's missing Joseph, they knew their secret's haunting them. The guilt is coming back to speak to them. A burden they were carrying. They can't do that again. Verse 33 says, now then please let your servant remain here as my Lord's slave in place of the boy, and let the boy return to his brothers. How can I go back to my father if the boy is not with me? No, do not let me see the misery that would come on my father. Judah's changed. Now he doesn't want to sell a younger brother so that he can get out of a situation. He says, take me instead. I give my life for his. Scripture says no greater love is there than this, that one man would give his life for another. But we see also a bit of Jesus' heart there. When Judah says, I'll take the blame. Take me. I'll be the substitute. I'll be the guilty one. Let me be punished, not him. Ultimately, that gets fulfilled in Jesus, who did become our substitute, who did take our blame, who did get punished in our stead. That was fulfilled in him. That's why we say Joseph is a type of Jesus. He's foreshadowing what Jesus would ultimately do. Now, gets to chapter 45. And Joseph can't hold it in anymore. He is overcome with emotions. So much so that in the Egyptian language, he cries out, everybody out! So all the officials, they scramble out of there. And all that's left is Joseph's brothers. And Joseph starts to weep so loud that the Egyptians in the other rooms and corridors hear him weeping. Even Pharaoh's household, maybe they're in the upstairs lobby room or something, in the palace suite, they hear him wail as well. That's how much release came over Joseph as he was weeping loudly. And he says to his brother, I am Joseph. I am Joseph. He would have said it in Hebrew. Ani Yusef. Ani Yusef, through tears, speaking their mother tongue to them. And they were in shock. Is this guy pretending? Is this true? But he qualifies it. And he tells them something no one else could know. I am your brother Joseph, the one you sold into Egypt. And maybe they look closer, and maybe, because the Egyptians sometimes had this goatee that some of them would wear, and some of it, it's like a thing you could attach as well and then take it off. Maybe got rid of that. He would be bald probably, because that's how the Egyptian officials looked, working in the palace. But now they would see a man speaking their mother tongue, and maybe his eyes looked familiar, maybe his voice started to ring familiar as well, saying, I'm Joseph, the one you sold into Egypt. And he says to them, don't worry, don't be distressed, don't be angry at yourselves for selling me here, because it was to save lives that God sent me ahead of you, verse 5. And we see there that Joseph, who could have been bitter, is full of grace. He could have been vengeful, but is full of mercy. He could have exacted on them punishment, but he shows kindness. What they had meant for evil, God turned around into good. The brothers had a plan, but God intercepted that plan and worked it around for his purposes. You probably heard of this lady called Corrie ten Boom. Maybe the younger folks, if you haven't, it's worth looking into this person's life. She was a young person during the Second World War in Holland, and they saw how the Germans, the Nazi army forces, invaded Holland, and they were extracting Jews and taking them to camps where they would exterminate them. So her father was a godly man. They made a plan to hide Jews in the secret compartment of their house. And they did it for a long time, saved many, many lives, but then someone betrayed them, one of their fellow folk, and sold them out to the German forces, the occupiers. And Corrie, her sister, her dad were taken into prison camps in Germany, suffered. Only Corrie survived. But her sister was always a voice of encouragement, saying, trust God, see God, even if the situation looks wrong. And she writes in her books many things about grace and forgiveness. And one of them is this saying that she says, there is no panic in heaven. God has no problems, only plans. And the story of Joseph is a huge insight into that, where things go really wrong, pear-shaped, but God is working all along. He's telling us, you can trust me, even if it looks dire, God is always working. And now comes the key verse. So if you're someone who makes notes, this is the key verse of the whole Joseph story, which says in verse 7, God sent me ahead of you to preserve for you a remnant on earth and to save your lives by great deliverance. Joseph looked at his brothers and thought of his father and the wives and all the grandkids, think, God has used me to save you. If only he knew. He knows now. But if only he knew back then, God was saying, there's a greater plan still. I'm preserving Judah because from him comes the Messiah. And I'm preserving all the brothers because from them comes the nation Israel. And from Israel, from the Jews, comes the Jewish Savior for all the world. So God was thinking of you. You're here today because of that. You're a Christian because of that. Your story is intertwined with Joseph's story and Judah's story. Because if Satan wiped out that family, there would be no Messiah, and we'd probably be either atheist or worshipping some kind of ungodly idols in some way, shape, or form today. But because God was working on a great deliverance for mankind, he moved Joseph into place so he could move the family there so that they'd survive that severe famine. And that's just a beautiful thing when you realize how all of this works together. The whole Old Testament is a tapestry leading us to the New Testament and Jesus and all that he would do. Joseph kisses his brothers and he weeps over them. And afterwards his brothers talked with him. And that's interesting because back in chapter 37 verse 4, they hated him. They couldn't stand him. It says there, they couldn't speak a kind word about him. 22 years later, God has turned things around and they talk together. Last week, they dined together. God has restored the relationships. I once thought I killed someone else. I was a little kid in primary school, and I thought I killed someone. Because I was at the neighbor's house, and we were like lots of, probably 5, 6 of us playing around, and I got hold of a compass pencil. You know where you draw circles on a page? A compass? Is that the right word? Compass, what? compass. You know the thing. It's got a sharp point. I got one hold of that. And Craig, the next door neighbor kid, he wanted it. So I said, no, I got it first. So he won. So we were wrestling over that thing. And at one point, I just shrunk really hard, and I stabbed him in the side. And he goes, ah, and there's blood. And I know what, little me thought I killed a man. So I ran out of there, wailing. I thought, I'm going to run away today. I'm just out of here. I've killed someone. Because, he fell over as well. So I ran into a field. There was a hole in the field, and over it, I ran to the field. I saw this hole, and there was like a corrugated iron over it. Sunplot. What's the English word for? Is that right? Corrugated iron top. So I jumped in there, and I pulled that thing over me, and I was just sobbing in the corner, thinking, what's going to happen to me? The police will get me, or I just need to run away. I killed a man. And then at one point, I don't know how long it was, I heard familiar voices. And it was the other kids. Joe, where are you, Joe? Don't worry, Joe, we're all right. And I heard Craig's voice, he's not dead. And I was kind of relieved. And so they saw me, they probably heard me crying. And they said, no. And Craig was like, I'm okay. And the relief that came over me. Oh, so I didn't kill you. I thought I did. Just the relief that I felt right then that I can go back home and not go to prison and not have that guilt over me. And I think in a way, that's a silly story, but when these brothers realized we did the wrong thing, we wanted to kill him, we sold him to slavery, but it's actually worked out good. What a sense of relief must have come over them. It wouldn't excuse what they did, but the release that Joseph felt and the release that they felt must have been amazing. God has orchestrated a reconciliation of a family. Corrie ten Boom. After the war, out of prison, a sister had died, her father had died in prison. She's traveling around nations in Europe, speaking at churches, and her message is forgiveness. At one of these meetings afterwards, a man approaches her, and she recognizes him. He was one of the prison guards at the concentration camp where they were kept. And he was the one who had a reputation for being a really bad man, a mean-spirited man that would treat them all in severe, hard ways. And here this man is standing in front of Corrie, and he reaches out his hand, and trembling he asks her, can you please forgive me? She stood there and she said she felt numb and cold, frozen. And she just prayed, Lord, help me. Her mind was cold. But she chose to stretch out her hand. And as she did, she said, grabbed and she chose these words, I forgive you, brother. And she says, as if a warmth came up her arm and over her whole body. And they stood to her for a long time, tears, reconciled, as she spoke a word of forgiveness for him. She's got so many quotes on forgiveness, but this one, to forgive is to set a prisoner free and to discover that the prisoner was you. Joseph did that. He showed such grace. That's why Joseph could be free in his hardened mind. He was kept in a dungeon at one place, and God exalted him, but he didn't stay in a prison or dungeon in his hardened mind. We're nearly done, folks. To each of them, these brothers, he gives new clothes. That's interesting because chapter 37, they stripped clothes of him. He doesn't repay evil with evil. He blesses them. He shows a godliness to them where they had shown wickedness towards him. 1 Peter 3:9 says, do not repay evil with evil or insult with insult. On the contrary, repay evil with blessing, because to this you were called, so that you may inherit a blessing. And then he says this interesting words as they are about ready to leave. He says to them, don't quarrel on the way. Because the previous time they went to Egypt and they went back, they were fighting with each other about whose fault is it that everything's going wrong. He says, don't do that anymore. The matter is settled. It's over. I've put it to rest. Don't need to visit the past. Everything is fine. Jesus cried out on the cross, it's finished. And when I'm reconciled with God, He takes my past, and I would want to say even my future, and He puts it on Jesus on the cross. And Jesus says, that matter of your sin is dealt with. It's settled. And we don't continue sinning. We don't get a license for sin. No, out of gratefulness, we want to live God-honoring lives because we're also grateful that Jesus did that for us. This is my second last verse. Paul writes in Romans 12:18. If it is possible, as far as it depends on you, live at peace with everyone. And that's a good insight for him, because when we forgive people, and we shouldn't harbor resentment or bitterness. But you don't have to become best buddies with people that you've forgiven. That's not always possible. I think of Jesus at one point, he spoke to people, he says to them, if you do not eat my body and drink my blood, you can have no part of me. And it says some of them turned away and didn't follow him anymore. They were insulted, or offended rather. And he asked the other disciples, are you offended as well? Do you also want to leave? And they said, Lord, you have the words of life. We're sticking with you. But not everyone stuck with Jesus. And He didn't run after everyone who didn't want to stick with Him. So sometimes life takes us on different paths, and that's okay. But Jesus didn't hate those who left, who chose the other path. He even gave His life for them if they should choose His work of salvation. Paul says, as far as it depends on you, you live at peace with everyone. Because sometimes we might walk on different paths. Our chemistry maybe doesn't work. Walk different paths, but we don't harbor resentment, anger, and bitterness in our hearts. Here's the closing slide. This is chapter 46, verse 3. God appears to Jacob in a dream. They're now traveling to Egypt. They're on their way. And one night God says to him, do not be afraid to go down to Egypt, for I will make you into a great nation there. I will go down to Egypt with you, and I will surely bring you back again, and Joseph's own hand will close your eyes. And God was just saying, listen, you're being uprooted, put in a new country. Sound familiar to anyone? But I'll go with you. I've been with you in Canaan. I'll be with you in Egypt. I'll bring you back to Canaan. Wherever you are, Joseph in prison, slavery, God was with him there. God is with us through all of life. And maybe a bit tongue-in-cheek, Cole, as you go to Broome and as you come back, God is with you guys. Let me pray for us. Lord, we thank you for your word and the Old Testament and the story of Joseph, and that we can see our own salvation story from what's written there. May you speak to us, remind us of the richness of your word through all this week as we ponder what we've heard. And may we be encouraged by you, because you are with us, and help us that we will be a people that do not quarrel along life's way, but that we can show grace, kindness, and love as Joseph did. So help us, God. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen. Amen. Music team, please come down.